Good morning. I'm Rosemary Baroody and welcome to my TED Talk on educating the whole child. Alfie Kohn once said, "We can't value what is easy to measure. Measurable outcomes may be the least important results of learning." And I'd like to question that last part, the least important. What is the most important? Let's start with my own education. This is me when I started school. I loved going to school, and I couldn't wait for the school year to begin every year. In the 1970s, the SRA reading program was in full swing as we read short stories and answered questions through each color level of reading, ultimately trying to become a black belt at reading. And that was fine, except it got a little monotonous, kind of like having peanut butter and jelly every day. Until 5th grade, when my teacher, Mrs. Brown, introduced us to chapter books. And I devoured them and developed a real appetite for learning and reading. And I loved it. But then when that unit ended, we reverted back to the SRA reading kit, and I completely shut down. And I told Mrs. Brown, "I can't read from the SRA stories anymore." And she said to me, "You don't have to. Pick a book that you like to read. When you're finished, come and conference with me and I'll grade you on that." And that really stuck with me, how she changed her method of teaching to meet my needs. And that actually planted the seed to my wanting to become a teacher, because I wanted to pass that on to someone else, that experience. So, as I got on the education freeway, going through college, becoming a Catholic school teacher, and then attending graduate school, I got off on the exit of learning theory and practice. When we're hungry, we go to the grocery store. When we have a hunger for knowledge, learning theory and practice. And my shopping list is my syllabus, which will tell me what I need to get. As I walk through the doors, I see a sign that says Gregorik's Learning Styles. I need to pick up one of each. The first thing I'm going to get are the concrete sequential learners. Those are the eggs. They all have their own special compartment. They're all perfectly organized, and I know exactly how many there are. Our CS learners are very organized, very detail-oriented, very good with pacing themselves and meeting deadlines. They're not too crazy about working in cooperative groups or doing creative activities. Then I need to get some abstract sequential learners. Those are my caviar, sophisticated learners who like to really research something to the point of becoming an expert. And when they do that, they're prepared to argue and debate. They also may need to work on working in cooperative groups. Then I have my abstract random learners. That's the party platter. We never eat this alone. It's for social gatherings. And my AR learners are very social. They like working in cooperative groups and bouncing ideas off each other. They don't like to memorize facts or work alone for a long period of time. Last, my concrete random learners. That's the salad bar. There are endless options to creating a salad. And so they like to explore and experiment. They like to brainstorm. They're not really good at pacing themselves and meeting deadlines. I chose to look at the CR learners last because I discovered that I'm a CR learner. I love to explore learning with no boundaries. And I really enjoy the learning process. But at the same time, I think I need to work with pacing myself. And even in my teaching, with pacing our units and making sure that assessments happen when they need to. Not necessarily the structured assessments. I can create rubrics to fit each learning style, but I need to do some backwards planning to keep those assessments as a guide to making sure I finish what I started. I also may benefit from working with another teacher who's more of a CS learner and more organized. That would actually help me a lot. So also, I need to make make sure that I have my shopping cart handy, because some days we're going to do independent work. Some days we're going to research. Some days there will be cooperative groups, and others we might just be doing some experimenting with different types of answers. But I want to make sure I offer my students everything in the shopping cart and encourage them to try to taste everything and stretch their learning abilities and their learning styles. Next in the store, I stopped by a sign that says brain-based learning. It's working. A lot of things are going on in the brain. The occipital lobe is responsible for visual perception, the left temporal lobe for speech and language, and the prefrontal cortex has to do with working memory and executive functioning. That's the part we really, really want to focus on, because that's where we want to store all that information. We want that higher level thinking going on. But in order for that to occur, the reticular activating system, or the RAS, filters information coming in. And if the RAS senses a threat, it responds with a fight or flight response and keeps everything in the lower brain and doesn't reach that prefrontal cortex. And sometimes a threat could be a student feeling embarrassed and being reluctant to participate. So in order to make sure that that gets filtered through, I'm going to pick up some pillows and blankets, maybe a teddy bear, make sure I keep my classroom safe and secure, and that the students feel comfortable enough to participate and not have that fear, because we want that information to reach their prefrontal cortex. So, also the RAS responds to positive stimuli and releases dopamine when there's something positive going on, and it really reacts positively to that, and we're going to talk more about that pleasure chemical. I also need to be aware of the multisensory approach. I need to introduce lessons in multiple different ways, and that's where the thalamus kicks in, because the thalamus's job is to take that sensory input and send it to the different parts of the brain, much like the person who works at the grocery store puts things away on the shelves. And next there's novelty. That's the person with the free samples at the grocery store. That kind of arouses a curiosity and makes you think, what is that? Where do I get more? We can do the same thing in our classroom. I put a different stuffed animal in my chair every week, and it kind of arouses that curiosity. The same thing happens in the brain. The RAS is activated and releases that dopamine and actually increases the active learning and working memory when that happens. So we want to add some more novelty to the classroom by introducing something new in new kind of fun ways. And then there are patterns in the brain. The brain naturally looks for patterns as it attaches that new information to the existing patterns, and it helps them retain that information. Then there are those personal connections. That's the magazine rack. When teachers share their personal stories with their students, they're helping the students activate the amygdala that kind of works with the hippocampus, and they both work together in responding to those emotional connections. And when they make those emotional connections, then they retain it longer, because that's where the hippocampus stores all those emotional files and those memories. Just like I still remember that experience I had in 5th grade 40 years ago, because I made that emotional connection to that story. We need to do that with our students. And when we make these connections and make meaning, it gives our brain energy, because it's kind of exciting, and you get this kind of positive feeling, that dopamine release, and it makes you want to repeat that experience. And when we have that dopamine release, that's our natural reward system. And so that's when we're at the bakery aisle, because it feels good. It's delicious food, makes us feel good, and it's kind of has that same response with that natural reward. Next, we're going to look at emotional intelligence. That's the next aisle in the store. That has to do with how we think about ourselves and how do we interact with others. The I theory has to do with our beliefs and our interactions. So that has to do with self-awareness, social awareness, self-management, and relationship management and how they're interconnected with each other. And I had to take an EI test to see how I measured up to these different categories. What do I need to work on? So when I'm looking at customer service, I'm thinking of that social awareness and relationship management. And I should be aware of my interactions with others and how that affects our relationships. I should also observe how other people interact with each other. Is it positive? Do I need to copy those positive attributes? It also makes me think of the climate in the school, because the students actually do read into the climate. What kind of relationships are the teachers having? Is it positive? Are they supporting each other? Because ultimately we want to support each other and build each other up. So I'm also going to pick up a mirror for self-awareness and self-management. As I self-reflect on my EI scores, I need to be evaluating who I am and my own behaviors before I can even address anyone else's. My strengths happen to be empathy and service to others, much like Mrs. Brown had empathy toward me and my problem I had with reading, and her service as far as adjusting the lessons to meet my needs. I should do the same for my students by paying attention to their needs and adjusting the lessons accordingly. I definitely need to work on confidence and leadership. So this summer, I'm going to delve into looking up resources in the library and online to see how I can tap into that and strengthen that a little bit more before the school year starts. So I chose Mr. Clean to represent that piece. I'm also going to pick up some candles for mindfulness, and that was the piece that I researched with the video. Practicing mindfulness at home and at school can benefit anyone. It helps calm our thoughts and process our emotions. The video was extremely helpful when it showed how the lady who introduced mindfulness to a middle school and even in kindergarten, another video showed how students were able to stop and think about their breathing and what they're listening to, not just as a management tool, which really it shouldn't be used as, but as a way to kind of gain more focus and concentration, and ultimately students improve their grades and their relationships with their parents and teachers. So mindfulness is something I definitely would like to incorporate in my class. And now I've rounded the corner to the next aisle of culturally relevant pedagogy. That's where we respect our cultural differences and learn from each other through that. So now I'm in the ethnic food aisle, and that's the part labeled Know Your Own Culture. So I grew up in a large Italian family with lots of different family traditions. I need to share that with my students, but I also need to encourage them to share the same type of stories with me and the rest of the class about their own culture and family traditions without stereotyping, because each family is different and has a different degree of their culture and family traditions in their own individual family. I also like to talk about the tenets of culturally relevant pedagogy because I want all my students to experience success. So I need to establish those high expectations and make sure my students can meet that challenge, in addition to adjusting to their diverse learning styles as needed. So I put here lobster compared to a can of tuna. I want my students to be served lobster. I want them to meet those high expectations. Cultural competence are related to the checkout line. When we meet other people, we're waiting in line, have little conversations with them, all different kinds of people. I need to have those type of conversations with my students. I need to validate who they are and respect that. And by making those connections, we can also embrace our differences instead of ignoring them. And then we have the critical consciousness. That's the parking lot, where we're checking out the different kinds of cars, maybe thinking about where people live in relation to where the grocery store is located. So I need to acknowledge my own personal bias and encourage students to challenge that status quo as we dissect the previously held beliefs. So I need to be thinking about that in the same kind of format. And as I leave the grocery store, I hope that I've stocked up on enough provisions for the next school year. But I know that I can always drive back and replenish my supply. And so in referring to the original quote about measurable outcomes, Alfie Kohn was correct. They are the least important results of learning. Mrs. Brown didn't care about my SRA scores. She cared about me and all of her students. And that may be the most important result of learning. And with that, I'd like to message my classmates and fellow teachers, keep calm and focus on teaching and learning. Thank you.